All rise, please, for the pledge.
Mrs. Sloan, Mr. Hohauser, Mr. Baer, Mr. Greenstein, Mrs. Johnson, Mr. McDermott, Mrs. Nadolny. Thank you.
I'll make a motion for the adoption of the agenda, April 8th, 2014. Do I have a second? Mrs. Johnson, all in favor? 7-0. Thank you. And now we will move to student and community comments. I would just like to remind everyone to please identify yourself for the record and keep to the 3-minute limit. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Paul Spiezio. I am a resident of Port Washington. And I live on Oldwood in in Manor Haven. I came here tonight because I had developed a concern. I have 2 daughters in the school system here. One is 5 and one is 6, and they take the buses every day. I drop them off every day. And you know, it just occurred to me one day when I was sitting there waiting for them, and I was like, you know, that's quite offensive, the fumes coming off the buses. So I thought not a big deal, but every day I'm smelling this, and I decided, you know, to do a little bit of research into it, and it turns out that there's a very, very close correlation between upper respiratory infections, asthma, and other problems in children that ride diesel buses. So I did some research, and just with my small amount of research, came up with, I mean, this is just an example of the tremendous amount of information as far as studies, and other things that have been done by, you know, EPA and other organizations, you know, documenting that. And then I thought, you know, we have a station that's opening up in Port Washington for compressed natural gas. I'm looking around, the Nassau buses are gas. It doesn't seem like, it seems that the means are there. And then I did a little bit of research, and it turned out that there's a tremendous amount of government money that could offset the cost of any sort of conversion that would be necessary to do this. So it seems to me that it's something that we should look into for health reasons for our children, and also, you know, it's a fiscally a good idea as well. It could save the district money because these companies would be, you know, cutting their fuel costs up to 50%, which is a tremendous amount for a bus company. So that's essentially what I wanted to say. Now, the goal also is to see what I would need to do, or someone would need to do, and who I would need to contact to actually get the ball rolling and making something like that happen. And that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Joel Katz. I'm a longtime resident of Port. I know you don't want to be confrontational this evening, and I'll try not to be because this is a very important evening. You're going to be approving the next budget tonight, and you certainly don't want any flack over that. Just a couple of questions. According to the agenda, you're going to approve a budget of $144,067,917. My question to you, Mrs. Sloan, is at what open meeting of the board or the budget committee was that figure arrived at, was discussed by the board members or the committee members? Because it certainly wasn't discussed. That specific number never came up at the last board meeting, and it didn't come up at the last budget committee meeting either. If you tell me that the budget committee went into executive session and it was determined there, I say no, you couldn't have done it there because the open meetings law doesn't allow you to do that there. Next item is, I notice on the agenda that Ms. Sherry Susan, I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, who is now our Director of Creative Arts, is resigning as of June 30 and is going to become the principal at the Daily School. That's wonderful. The question to you is, are we going to replace the Director of Arts She's earning a considerable amount of money. She must have an assistant. She probably has secretarial and clerical backup. That's an expensive directorship. And I hope that this evening you can disclose to the public whether that's going to be a permanent savings to us. In other words, we no longer will have a director of arts, or are you going to replace that director? Last comment is this about the budget. I must tell you that it's extremely disappointing to hear that the Budget Committee, after turning over every rock, stone, and pebble in Port Washington, couldn't reduce the $5.3 million increase in the budget that Mrs. Callahan had projected with her very tentative rollover budget. We still have a $5.3 million increase in spending. I mean, is it possible that the Budget Committee and others looked and looked and looked and could not find anything of consequence to reduce spending by? My suggestion to you is this: if the committee, any budget committee, is unwilling or unable to come up with significant savings, why not appoint or allow a group of civilians in town to assist the committee in its investigations and
30 seconds.
thank you, and possibly come up with some savings. I can give you the names of a half dozen people who are very talented and who could easily assist the committee, who would want to do it. So I ask you to consider it. I mean, if this is going to go on year after year, where we investigate to no avail, that's kind of a slap in the face to the committee. Thank you. I mean, to the community. I'm sorry.
Good evening. My name is Dana Rochester, and I have 2 first graders at Daly. I'm here tonight because since I last spoke in the fall, we've gained an additional 2 students in the first grade year at Daly, so that every first grade class now has 25 students. We're all aware of the budget deficit facing our district, but a tenable class size for our students and teachers must be protected. One of my daughter's classes was so badly behaved when their teacher was out of the room for training that every parent in the class was sent home a note. I have to think that the number of students in that room played a significant role. A parent in the other first grade class told me her daughter was stuck at the same reading level for months until she emailed the teacher, and the next day her daughter came home with books 2 levels higher. One can't help but think that our children are not getting the attention they deserve because there are so many of them. Our district prides itself on teaching to the individual student, but teaching to an oversized multi-level class affects the ability to teach well to students at different levels. While the additional aid in the first grade at Daly has been helpful, the negative impact of the large number of students on my children's experience this year is still very much a real concern for me. We're asking our children to do so much more in school and with less resources. Please keep us in the first grade at Daly in mind during the budget planning this year. Our classes are already well over the district limit. Thank you.
If there are no more community comments at this time, we will close that out. I would just like to respond to a few things. First of all, the suggestion on the busing, the best place to go would be to the Budget and Facilities Committee, and tied into other comments made, we are always welcoming any community members to those committee meetings, and we are open to any suggestions to look at any items on spending. No personal feelings, no personal objections. We really do look at everything, and anyone is welcome to come to those meetings, and the meetings are posted on the website, the date and time, and I know that if someone wants to attend and is unable to, that our budget chair, Mr. Baer, is always open to receiving emails and is very responsive. As for the class sizes, I would just like to say we are very conscious of what's going on with some of the class sizes, and we have been watching Daly, because someone here this evening was from Daly, but all of our classes, we have a few levels in different buildings that we're watching very carefully, and we are also watching our budget dollars so that if we get to the tipping point, or if we decide we are already at the tipping point, we are going to have to make some adjustments. So we are very conscious, and we just want the community to be well aware of that. finally, also, I just wanted to make mention this evening, Senator Jack Martins is at this very moment, I think it began actually at 6:30, having a forum on substance and safety and substance abuse. And he had heard about the task force here in Port Washington, which I am very fortunate enough to co-chair with Stephanie Joannan, and she is there this evening. And Dr. Mooney and I were also invited to speak on the panel as experts of what we're doing in the school district, which was very exciting. So Ms. Joannan is there tonight representing us, and we will hear about that. It's wonderful to be recognized for the hard work that we're doing in this district. So I just wanted to let everybody know about that. And finally, Mrs. Suzanne, yes, in fact, this evening will be on the agenda because she will be resigning from her position as the Director of Creative Arts, and she will be appointed the principal at Daly as of June 30th. And we will be posting to replace that position. It's a very important position to us here in this district, even more so now that it's been filled by Mrs. Suzanne, and she's brought that department to such a place that we couldn't possibly turn our backs on it. So we will be looking for a replacement. And because that came up, I'm going to jump ahead in the agenda for just a moment and move to item D1 and D2 in personnel. And I'll make a motion for item D1 and D2. Do I have a second? Mr. Hohauser, any discussion? Dr. Mooney?
I just wanted to, first of all, excuse my voice. I'm fighting a bit of a cold, but I do want to thank every group who participated in the search process. We've really been looking for a principal for Daly Elementary School since last year, and it's something that we've taken a great deal of time to do, and it's very exciting that we're able to find someone internally to be able to move into this position. Mrs. Suzanne has worked for the district for over 26 years, and she was a former Daly teacher, and then as an administrator as Director of Creative Arts, which she, as Mrs. Sloan mentioned, has done a very wonderful job. I also want to thank Mrs. Cheryl Haimovich for her wonderful leadership of Daly this past year, and that she will be assisting Mrs. Suzanne in the transition, and we think that that's just very important for everyone involved. Daly is going in a great direction, and we definitely want to see all of that continue. So many thanks to the teachers, administrators, and parents who participated in the process, and this is just a really happy occasion tonight, and we're very pleased to be able to make this appointment. I'm very pleased to make this recommendation to the board.
Thank you, Dr. Mooney. I'll call to question. All in favor? 7-0. Dr. Mooney.
I don't want to put Mrs. Suzanne on the spot, but I am. If you could just come up and just say a few words and go from there.
Thank you, Dr. Mooney, and to the entire school board, Mrs. Callahan, Mrs. Fennick, Dr. Westerveld. As you know, I'm extremely excited, put a great deal of thought into even approaching you to apply for this position. I love Daly, I love Port Washington, and just am so excited to be welcomed back to the Daly community as their principal. And I look forward to continued working with the board and my fellow administrators, and most of all the teachers and parents at Daly School. So thank you so much for your support.
And now, Dr. Mooney, your report.
I don't have too much more to add this evening, other than I think we can safely say that there'll be no more snowstorms, and we are adopting the budget tonight, and a lot of hard work has gone into this, and that we are continuing our budget discussions looking forward, because we know that what is being proposed for this year's budget is not a long-term solution. But we are very committed to maintaining the programs that we have. And again, looking at the other issues that, of course, have impact on our students' instruction, including class size, and just working very hard to balance all the different challenges with which we are faced. But I'm confident that we will continue to work through the variety of issues that we are dealing with and all the challenges that we face ahead. Other than that, I will turn it over to Ms. Fennick for the enrollment report.
Thank you, Dr. Mooney. As of April 2nd, we have 5,352 students enrolled, 62 more students than last year at the same time. And our kindergarten enrollment, we have a projected enrollment of 391 students, and right now we're at 351. I do want to mention at the same time last year we had 340 children registered at this time. Thank you.
I'll also turn it over to Kyle Kalenda for our student report.
Thank you, Dr. Mooney. Spirit Week ends this Friday at Schreiber with our pep rally. Schreiber Night of Jazz is this Thursday evening at the Schreiber Auditorium. And the College Consortium is tomorrow night. We have over 85 colleges attending this year. The program begins at 6:30 with panel discussions and will continue until 9:15 when the college fair portion is over. In years past, we've had as many as 1,000 students and parents attend. The list of schools can be found on the Schreiber Guidance website under College Consortium. All spring sports teams are moving in the right direction, and the students of this district would like to congratulate Ms. Suzanne and wish her the best of luck.
Thank you. I'll make a motion for the approval of minutes for March 25th, 2014. Second, Mrs. Johnson, all in favor? 7-0, thank you. And now we will move to our discussion item, the budget. Mrs. Callahan, do you want to start us?
Thank you, Mrs. Sloan. This evening, I don't have a physical presentation. We have had a number of discussions, and I believe from the beginning of our budget process, we did talk clearly about the desire to maintain our program to the best of our ability, knowing that the next few years are not going to be any easier for us. In fact, as we understand it, one of the conditions of the governor's budget is that by June 1st of 2015, every school district has to come up with a plan of cutting 1% of the current year's budget as a savings, and that project is going to be led in each county by either the largest school district or the local BOCES. That's the only issue that is not clear yet. So while the Budget Committee and the board has talked about their concerns for the development of the 15-16 budget, the governor has somewhat taken that plan of yours and legislated it to other districts that did not have a similar plan. So we will be looking, and we have already begun, for 15-16 to start thinking about other cost-saving efforts on the part of the district. But it is certainly accurate to say that this year's program maintains it maintains all staff that are currently with us. Any positions that are being vacated are slated to be filled. All those teachers who are retiring are needed in the classroom because of our growing enrollment. And the board has certainly, in this budget, which is a 3.79% increase, has shown its desire to maintain program when we are asking the community to pay for 1/3 of the increase in our budget, and we are taking 2/3 of the increase in our budget from district savings. We've talked about that in prior meetings, the concern for fiscal stress, but the inability of districts to maintain program without looking into their fund balance and being susceptible to fiscal stress. So the only difference in the budget that is online for this evening, that's on the website and which has been provided to the board members, is a difference of approximately $180,000 greater than what was in our last presentation. That was based solely on the fact that the state of New York provided Port Washington with additional state aid, and that has been added to our budget in the buildings and grounds area of the budget, which was discussed at our last Budget and Facilities Committee meeting, and will be used, hopefully, for either the repair or replacement of the daily fire alarm system, which was also discussed at that meeting. We are asking you also to approve the property tax report card, which is simply documentation which has to be posted on the SED website, which shows the dollar amount of the increase of the budget as it relates to the increase in student enrollment or decrease in student enrollment. It goes into that big database in the sky that SED has for us. Other than that, I really don't know if you have specific questions about any of the line items in the budget, but I believe that I followed the board's direction from the last meeting, both the board meeting and the subsequent budget and facilities meeting.
I noticed the budget doesn't have the anticipated expenditures in it this year. Is there anything in there that if we saw that, it would, make us look at different items?
I do not believe so. The reason that your document does not have that, however, is because you may remember that in one of our last negotiations, there were salary increases for one of the bargaining groups that were effective in February, and therefore those salaries had to all be re-encumbered in the budget, and actually that work has not been totally done, and I did not want to provide you with something that was inaccurate. But no, I don't believe that the overall number in the budget would give you any reason for pause.
Thank you. One other thing which you may or may not know, and I'm sorry I didn't get this to you earlier, the OC Ed line, I know, is staying pretty flat. We have the same number of people then we expect to be going this year to next year. Is that correct?
You may recall that last year in the development of the 13-14 budget, we eliminated OC Ed for other than special ed students, unless there was an exception made by the superintendent of schools, which has not happened this year. We had some interesting correspondence. So the line actually that you are looking at, 2280, has money in it for occupational education. That's really targeted for special ed students. The students who used to go to cosmetology and other programs in the high school, that was coded under 2110-490, and that has a 0 in it for both this current year and next year. We did recently get correspondence from BOCES, which said they're going to start billing us on a 3-year average. And I can understand from their perspective why this is necessary for them. There's a document called a letter of intent. Districts are supposed to complete this in the spring to let BOCES know their anticipated enrollment so that they can hire the appropriate teachers and have classrooms and so on. Because of the cost of BOCES programs, districts have in the past not necessarily provided them with the appropriate number. They've held back and said, we're going to send 2 students, and then they send 10. And then BOCES is rushing around trying to scurry for the needs of the students. So they have said, we're going to take the last 3 years of your actual enrollment, and that's what we're going to bill you for, whether you have 10 students coming to us or not. If you only have 2, but you had 10 for the last 3 years, we're going to bill you for 10 students. So we've had some discussion in the administration office, because you could take the view, well, if I'm being billed for 10, I'm going to send 10 students. But then that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and you never reduce your number in the budget. So we have taken the position for the next 2 years, we will hold fast to what our decision had been, and we will pay for a few extra students, if necessary, in order to get our average to become a true number. So that was a big, long answer to a very short question, but I thought it was interesting information.
No, I appreciate it because it explains why the budget line is staying the same where the number of students may be varied. So that was exactly what I was looking for, so thank you.
In that regard, it's sort of like the smoothing that's being undergone with respect to other expenditures that are being made. Is that right? Oh, sorry.
Mary, the comments about the governor's actions are not something that we're required to follow at the moment. That has to do with ultimately crediting tax savings back in the form of property taxes to local residents.
I have been trying with my local business officials organizations, the state business official organizations, and the state school boards to ferret out exactly the answer to your question. Because everywhere in the media where you see this 1% listed, they're not saying 1% savings in your budget, they're saying 1% reduction in the levy, which is a very different thing relative to not only the total increase in the budget would not be impacted. Well, if you reduce the budget by 1%, you're definitely going to reduce the increase that you would have otherwise had. But if it's a 1% reduction, period, it can be in that portion that I keep referring to as the gap, the board's portion that they made up this year, the 68% of the increase which came from the board savings. If it's really a 1% reduction in the levy, which right now is only a 1.35% to begin with, there won't be any levy increase to speak of. It will all be having to come from Board of Education savings and fund balance. And no one has truly been able to answer that as to what extent that is a voluntary 1% savings.
No, but all of that so far has been linked to the property tax credit the governor has proposed as part of the budget. It is, in fact, even though he put forward a budget where, or a proposal where, as long as you stayed within the tax cap this year, property tax credits would be given or checks sent out. We still would have been, we could have still adopted tonight a budget that would have pierced the tax cap if we had so selected to do so. And following next year, even though he is again urging everybody to consolidate and do a whole bunch of other things, we are not obligated at that point to go along with that if we so choose that it's not in the best interest of the school district.
Well, that's certainly what I'm hoping. I can't tell you exactly when something is written legislatively what the interpretation of that is going to be. But I know that we have discussed already in the Budget and Facilities Committee the need for a far less of a board savings contribution to make up any gap in the future.
If it's possible that we might need to reduce our levy by 1% next year without, irregardless of the impact it may have on our children and our educational program, then I know this is a late entry, but perhaps we should throw another few $1 million into the budget this year, pierce the cap, so at least we have some wiggle room next year.
I'll do 2%.
Is there anyone else who has any comments? Thank you.
Always an interesting idea. Just back to the original point that Mary made also, I think that we've been talking about this number for a number of sessions, that when the budget was first published, it was more or less at this number, and I think there have been at least 4, 5, 6, or 8 times, whether it was at the Budget Committee level or in this auditorium, that number has been up on the screen, and anybody who's sort of sat through the meetings and watched the presentations has seen that number. So it's been posted. It's not been pulled out of thin air tonight only. So.
I just want to say, as we close out the discussion, to once again thank Mrs. Callahan and your entire office for all this work, and the Budget Committee. And the process began a long time ago, and next year's process has already begun. And I think that we are just doing everything we possibly can to overcome the obstacles before us. So thank you, everyone who served on the committee, and the community members that attended and gave their input. It's always helpful and valuable to us. And I believe at this time we will ask if the community has any comments or questions on the budget. Yes, yes, this is just about the budget. It's part of the budget hearing. And if everyone would still identify themselves for the record, please.
Sure, if this is the right time or not. Frank Russo, President of the Port Washington Educational Assembly. It's some suggestions regarding next year's budget. Is this the inappropriate time for that? I want to compliment the board, Dr. Mooney, Ms. Callahan, for the wonderful job you did in meeting the tax cap, which I know was very difficult, but I think it does bring a good part of the community together, and hoping I get a letter complimenting you in the papers, but I want to compliment you because I know it was a very difficult job. Next year, if you're following the pension part of the costs, my judgment is that there's a good chance next year that 18.25% factor applied to the teachers' salaries is not going to go up, and there's a good chance, 50-50, that it's going to go down by maybe 1% or so. And the year after, I think personally, is going to go down by 2 or 3%. Every 2% is bringing you a lot of money. That would bring in quite a bit of extra money, well over $1 million in pension cost savings. So I just want to mention that. And plus, something else that very few people are aware of, I don't know if you all are, I'm sure you must be, but on the new Tier 6, which I know only governs the new teachers hired since April of 2012, the new Tier 6 is much, much better than most people realize if you look at the details. about 90% of our new teachers will be paying about 6%, 5.75%, 6% towards their pensions, which on average is more than half the pension cost. You know, over the years, that 18% factor is more like 10%. So if they're paying 6%, that's going to be paying roughly 60% of the pension costs. So that's going to, as I know it'll take time, as we hire each year, we're hiring 3 or 4% more teachers, new teachers, I should say. They'll be on that new Tier 6. So it's a very, very good plan. And plus the formula, again, I don't know if you know this, the formula is better. It's not as generous as it used to be. They earn less. It's a 5-year average, for example, of the highest salary that they compute the pension on, not 3 years. And there are other things in the percentages for the first 20 years. I won't get into it all, but it's a much improved tier. So new teachers are going to be really doing, I think, a fair share. They're going to be treated more like individuals in private employment. It's the existing teachers who have it very, very good, much better than anyone in private employment. So just so that's one major thing. 2 areas, and I gave Mr. Baer a copy, and I think I gave Dr. Mooney a copy. You can get it on the internet, the New York State Education Department website, professional staffing ratios. It's not as easy to get, apparently, as I thought, but there are 2 areas where Port Washington stands out with having a much, much higher ratio of employees in certain categories than the average Nassau district, as well as Suffolk. But Nassau is the one I particularly focus on. The 2 areas are the paraprofessionals. We have roughly 180. The average for a district our size is 120. So we have 60 more than the average Nassau district. 60 more paraprofessionals. Now, granted, their salaries are low. Some are only $20,000, some maybe $30,000. The benefits, pension is small, Social Security is small, but healthcare costs are very high. Probably talking $40,000 loaded costs per para, and we have 60 more than the average Nassau district. Maybe there's a justification part of it for special needs, but not for 60. The second area is guidance counselors. We have 16 or so, 16 and a half. The average for our size school district is 12, so we about 4.5 more than the average. And they are paid much more, by the way, than the psychologists. Same salary schedule, but they are more experienced, or they have more years, so they're paid higher than the psychologists. We have right number of psychologists, right number of nurses, right number of librarians, so forth, but not guidance. We are above by about 4.5. Finally, the Schreiber class sizes. I've gone over this many, many times. Maybe it's due to the modified block scheduling. I don't really know, but our teachers are averaging 17 1/3 hours per week instead of the 20 that the contract allows. Plus, we have close to 200 classes. I looked at all. We have 1,000 plus classes, as you know. About 190 of them have 21 or fewer students in them, and these are not the ESL, not the AIS, not the classes marked with the little A, which I don't even know what it means, but I know is a special kind of a class, not the resource rooms. I exempted all the classes that were, and even if 4/5 of these, there's a justification. If we could consolidate 40 of these classes, we could save about 5 or 6 teacher positions. Teacher salaries, this is the key thing. Median salary, and I think you all know it, but the median salary now, as of February, with the news, $117,000. Middle salary, half our teachers make more than $117,000, half make less. The average is less. Average is maybe 108 or something, 105 to 110. But the median, the middle salary, $117,000, one of the highest in Long Island. Now, what that tells me, too, is the new teachers I have sympathy for. They're going to have it rougher with the pension costs and so forth. But for the existing teachers, I think there's a strong justification for freezing salaries for 2 or 3 more years for the existing teachers. And that's based on the market. If this were a private company, we'd never be acting the way we're acting. The market is saying we have between 4,000 and 5,000 applicants. I've checked this for 40 years, never changed, since 1970. We have 4,000 to 5,000 applicants for roughly 20 new teaching positions. And even if only 20% are very well qualified, what does that tell us about why we have to pay these ridiculous high salaries? It's not justified by the market. Again, they're lovely people. My wife was a public school teacher, my mother, daughter and 2 daughters, wonderful people. Father-in-law, policeman, police in there, so 150,000. Give me a break. We're trying to balance these wonderful people, and they are wonderful people, policemen and teachers, with these people who are suffering. Not everybody's suffering, but an awful lot of property owners are suffering. And Nassau is one of the highest property tax states in the counties in the nation, as you know. And finally, I just wanted to let you all know, in case you have any interest in this, we're going to have a mandate relief forum And we have someone from the New York State School Boards Association coming. It's not just us, just an alliance with what's called LIFER, Long Islanders for Educational Reform, at the Melville Marriott Hotel on Thursday, May 8th, 7 o'clock. It's free. We've got Mr. David Little. You probably know him, I suppose. He's the chief lobbyist for the New York State School Boards Association. He's going to come. We're talking about mandate. The big one for you folks, of course, is a tri-board amendment. We want to reform that, eliminate the automatic step increases when a contract expires. But we're also dealing with binding arbitration for police, pension reform for everybody. We have Steve Levy, the former county executive, will be hosting it. Assemblyman Fitzpatrick, who has a mandate relief bill now introduced in Albany, just introduced a couple of months ago, trying to deal with these issues. And E.J. McMahon from the Empire Center for Public Policy. But you're all invited. If you can make it, please come May 8th, Thursday, the Melville Marriott Hotel at 7 p.m. Sorry for taking so much time. I apologize.
Good evening, Howard Simon. Just one quick question and one more observation. The question is, it would be helpful for, I think, the community to understand what the enrollment numbers really will be for next year when we talk about class size debates and how we're going to spread things around. We are hearing again the projected enrollment for kindergarten next year is 391 students, if I heard correctly, currently at 351. We were at 340 last year. So that tells us 391 students are expected to join the district come September. How many seniors are leaving the district this June? Because if it's more than that number, then the student population district-wide goes down. If it's less than that number, then student population goes up. And if staffing levels are staying static, that will matter for class size. That's just something I think would be valuable for people to understand what the class size calculations have at stake. The other observation, and I'll admit I'm at a loss on this one, trying to follow whether or not the 1% discussion from the governor is, I don't want to use the word mandate, but is a requirement, is a suggestion. But to be clear, cutting the levy by 1% doesn't sound like what's being discussed as it was portrayed here. Because the levy, let's say, is 1.35, to say cutting it by 1% would take it to almost nothing is incorrect. Cutting it by 1 point would take it to almost nothing. But cutting it by 1 point is not the same as cutting it by 1%. I just want to make sure we know what we're talking about. Is it a 1% shift or a 1 point shift? Statistically, those are two very different figures.
1% of 100.
I apologize, sir, but the discussion was that the levy was
1% of
$1.35.
$129 million
1%.
would be $1.29 million.
I agree.
Yes.
Yes, but you also said, if I heard correctly, and if I did not, I apologize, that the levy was 1.35, and that cutting it by 1% would take it almost to nothing.
The levy increase of 1.35, the levy increase, 1.35% represents an increase of $1.7 million.
Yes.
But the levy is $129 million.
Right.
So a 1% reduction in the levy is a reduction of $1.29 million. A 1% reduction in the budget would be $1,440,000.
Right, that was what I figured. I just want to make sure I understand what we're talking about. So that's fine. And again, as I said, it would help to know the enrollment figures if we're expecting overall district enrollment to be higher or lower next year.
The district, as a matter of course, uses a 3-year cohort survival model. We also use a live birth record from Nassau County to project our element of our kindergarten enrollment. And over the years, since I have been here, the last 14 years, those numbers have actually been more conservative than our actual enrollment. We're not quite sure why everybody is coming to Port Washington, but they do seem to be coming, and it doesn't make a difference what month it is, but they continue to come.
I don't disagree. As I said, just if we're going to talk about what the kindergarten projection is of a certain number, we certainly have a number that we know how many seniors are expected to leave. That's all I'm looking for.
Well, we do have that number, and we also know that, as Ms. Fennick said, last year she provided a number of how many children were enrolled at this point. It was 90% of the projected enrollment, but last year the projected enrollment was around 350. This year the projected enrollment is 390, and we're at 90% of that number. So I could see us exceeding the 390 very easily, just as we exceeded the 350 or 376 last year that was the projected number by a good 20.
Again, I don't disagree, but that doesn't change the fact that there's a number we do know with a certainty. That's all I'm asking. So, okay, thank you.
Right. Well, we have 402 seniors being graduated.
Thank you.
No? What's the number?
One of the things that you have to always be aware of is we have what has generally been termed in-migration, which continues across all the grades throughout the district. So even when you just look at the raw number of 391 supposedly coming in, 402 going out, those numbers in isolation don't really capture the overall flow of kids. And for example, we now have 410 in kindergarten off a projection that was, I think, 370 something. Right. So that figure alone, we graduated last year far less than we're taking in. So the upward slope has continued, and as Ms. Fennick said, we have 60 more kids year over year. The projection, if that same trend continues, we will again have 40, 50 more next year. We seem to be in some cycle where we're staying at this 400, and if you look at the populations of 11th grade, 10th grade, we are graduating under 400, but taking in now more than 400. And then within migration, the number is actually almost double just the kindergarten range.
Understood. Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Sloan, can I have another 2 minutes at the microphone, since this is budget discussion? Okay, I would like to raise an issue that's been raised many times in the past. It's a suggestion for an area for the Budget Committee to look into for the 15-16 school year, and that is teacher absenteeism in the Port Washington School District. This is something that has been focused on since 1989. As far as I know, I've got reports back there about that. Mrs. Callahan has provided $925,000 in the budget that you're going to approve tonight, almost $1 million, $925,000 for teacher absenteeism. I believe we have the equivalent of 464 teachers on the payroll. At least that's what the website showed us not too long ago. If you go through the mathematics, and I did, that works out to, on the average, 16 paid leave days per year, per school year, per teacher. 16. That's a lot, I think, for a person who's supposed to be at her job or his job. What is it, 183 days, but then you can subtract a couple of snow days and a couple of conference days. And so the 16 paid leave days on the average is an awful lot. Now, I foiled for information a few years ago, and I did find that there were some teachers who took no paid leave days. There were other teachers who took much more than 16 or 17 paid leave days. I'm raising this issue because I suggest to you, Mrs. Sloan, and to the Budget Committee that it's a little out of hand. And I think with some effort, and this suggestion was made in the past, if you could bring that $925,000 down, perhaps by 30 or 40%, you'd be saving hundreds of thousands of dollars for the district, and that's money. It's a lot more money than the $15,000 or $20,000 you think you're going to save by eliminating 3 polling places next year. So I hope this is just not my suggestion. This is a topic that's been on a lot of people's mind. Some people call it excessive teacher absenteeism. And by the way, let me just conclude my remarks by saying this to you. I won't tell you who it was, but I had a conversation with one of the leaders of our teachers union years ago about this issue. And, you know, teachers under the current contract are allowed 38 paid leave days a year. That's an awful lot. 20 sick, 10 for illness in family, then you get death in family and other reasons. It adds up to 38. And the head of the teachers union back then told me, well, I thought it was excessive. They said, no, this is an entitlement, that the union worked hard and long to get these 38 days into the contract, and the union sees nothing wrong with the teachers availing themselves of those days. I thought that was a little strange for people who consider themselves to be professionals.
Do you have anything else on the budget at this time?
That is the budget.
No,
That's
now
next
you're
year.
getting
Wait,
into
I'm talking
individual
about
groups.
next year's budget.
Okay, are you done?
Thank you, Mrs. Sloan.
Thank you.
Thank
Are there any other comments at this time?
Good evening, Dave Sattinger. I guess my comment is simply this: if we are, and I'm glad we're keeping the programs that we're keeping, and I think it's very important that we continue to do that in the future. I think we're at a point where we need to be more specialized in our education than cookie cutter. But to the extent that we're looking at dipping into the reserves that we are this year, to that extent, this budget process has failed. And once again, I want to get back to this same idea that I've mentioned before, which is simply this. We have to take a look at what a balanced budget would be. We need to take a look at where we've been for the last 5 years with all our bargaining units and the percentage of the budget that they've earned and have, and we need to keep it there. And we need to come to a balanced budget. There's no other way around it, or we're going to be like some of the other communities that have seen their reserves dwindled, gone, and they're on the precipice of a financial calamity if we have another housing bubble burst, or whatever the case may be. So my request to the board is simply this: you need to be tougher. And I don't know how you go about it. I appreciate the challenges of the Triborough Amendment, but it's going to take leadership. It's going to take administration being willing to stick to their portion of what a budget would be, and leading by example and making that happen. And it's time for that to happen. We can't submit any more budgets like this. Thank you.
That will close out our budget hearing for this evening. Thank you. We'll now move to community reports, policy and personnel.
We have not had a policy and personnel committee meeting since my last report at the last board meeting. We are having a meeting this Friday in the annex, and among other topics of conversation will be the code of conduct. We're in the process of reviewing the code. Everybody's welcome to come. It's 8:30 on Friday.
Budget, do you know the date of the next meeting? I don't know if there's anything else.
We had our meeting on March 31st, and as Mary had mentioned, we started on the 15-16 budget. We're trying to look at every area within the school district. Sort of gave it an acronym, Project One, because we're looking at ways to possibly come up with 1%, not so much to align with the governor, but more to fill what is an anticipated shortage as we go into next year. It involves really involving all of the different departments of the school district. We really want to hear from within where we might be able to save money. We're looking at technology, where that might bring us savings if we have certain investment. One of the areas we are looking at and will be some of the areas of instruction, the schedule here at the high school, whether or not it really costs more or doesn't cost more, the class sizes across the district, anything and everything. We're also looking at one of the other ways really that we can balance is additional income. We now have certain ways where money is coming in, but we need to enhance that. We're continuing to have discussions about, for example, the banners down on the field that was talked about that could drive revenue in, the parking, naming rights, and a few other areas, more grants, and then ultimately we will have a discussion on busing, and it's a perfect opportunity to also bring up the natural gas idea at that time, but also the distance where we today bus children from, and whether or not there's money. Certainly, as had been previously mentioned, we have built into some of the assumptions the pension cost reduction, and that we've done a 5-year projection on that already, and we have made the assumption, if you will, that the pension cost will go down 1% a year continually for the next 4 years following this year. Whether or not that comes true goes a long way to whether or not we fill the hole or not of the overall deficit that we run at the moment. So the next meeting is the 28th, Monday the 28th at 8:30. Again, everybody is invited. We have several people who are here tonight who do come regularly and contribute and ask questions, and it stirs debate, and everybody is welcome. The numbers are there on the table for everybody to look at, and we welcome any insight that anybody can bring to the process.
Thank you. Now curriculum, Larry?
We have not met since our last meeting. Our next meeting is Friday, April 25th at 8:30 at the Daily Annex, and most people are welcome. Actually, everybody is. And so we'll see you there.
Thank you. I will now move to the action items, the budget item A1 through A4. Do I have a second? Mr. Bear, any further discussion? A1 through A4. All in favor? 7-0. Thank you. And now I will move items B1 through D4, pulling D1 and D2 because we have already voted on them. Do I have a second? Mr. Greenstein, all in favor? 7-0. Thank you very much. And now do we have any new business? Oops, old business comes first. Do we have any old business? New business, Ms. Nadolny. Oops, sorry.
I actually just want to make it a point that everybody know that the next Board of Ed meeting is actually on a Thursday night. So in case you marked every Tuesday, the next one's actually the 24th, right? Yeah.
August Big Bang.
Thank you. We now have our last opportunity for the community to be heard. Okay. Nope.
Good evening. First, I want to congratulate Ms. Suzanne on her new position and thank her and the entire Weber Drama Club for their tremendous performance of Footloose over the weekend. If you didn't have a chance to see it, it was amazing. And Mr. Bear, they only charged $5 a ticket. So if you're looking for revenue, it was worth way more than that. Ironically, though, and I was glad to hear that we're reviewing the Code of Conduct policy because that's one of the reasons I'm speaking right now. Ironically, the Footloose itself was sort of a true story, based on a true story of the ban of dancing in the town of Elmore City, Oklahoma. And somewhat like the town of Elmore City, Oklahoma, I have come to believe that the discipline, the policies and procedures and discipline of the students in Port Washington really needs to be strongly reviewed and overhauled. Recently, my son received basically 2 days of in-lunch detention. His whole period did. And he didn't do anything wrong. And I just fail to understand the culture and the environment that we're creating for education here in this district. I don't know if any of you were aware, but recently the U.S. Department of Education sort of released a scathing report on the discipline of children's, mostly adversely affecting minority children, but it really talks about the pipeline, the schools to prison pipeline that exists in our country. And I encourage you all to look deeply into it. We have issues, and it's an issue that's personal to me because when my son Jackson was in first grade, he was actually threatened here in Port Washington with suspension as a first grader. Not so much for things that happened in the classroom, but for being a little boy on the playground. And you know, I sat in the principal's office and I talked with
30 seconds.
the principal, and you know, he was competitive. But we have issues, and I strongly want us to really look at this because something's not right in Port Washington. And we need to take a look at how the other districts that we compare ourselves to are handling these situations and really reevaluate the situation. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Stephanie Silverstein. I'm one of the co-presidents of Parents Council, and I wanted to just thank the community and the teachers and the HSAs and everybody for their contribution to the clothing drive last week. We have a terrific outreach committee in this district where everybody participates, and there is a need in this community. If anybody wants to, we welcome anybody to get involved with outreach and to come down and see the need that exists in this community. And we just want to thank everybody for the overwhelming support we had. So we were still unloading bags on Saturday. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you. If there are no other community comments, I see someone coming. Okay.
Matt Melkonian. I also wanted to extend a very, very large congratulations to Sherry Suzanne. It's very exciting. And I wanted to say that I hope you can find someone to fill those very special shoes. She brought beautiful vision and energy to the Cultural Arts Department, and I think we all benefited greatly from having her lead our children. Thank you.
Thank you, and now we are adjourned.